Hey, everybody. So how many apps do you have to order lunch? A lot, right? Too many. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. So I'm here because Heidi invited me. She came to a movie night at my house in Chicago, an all-women movie night, and she said, you got to come talk about this at Intermittent. But it actually goes a step backwards. There's a woman named Rachel, who's sitting up here in the second row, who introduced me to Heidi, because she said, you should know Heidi. Heidi's awesome. You guys have a lot in common. Take a step back from Rachel. There's a woman named Jill who posted a job in a Facebook group that we were both in, and that's how I got this job, where I met Rachel, which is how I met Heidi, which is how I'm here today. And if you take one step further back, there's a woman named Nicole who created that Facebook group because she thought women in tech in Chicago needed a space to share opportunities with each other. So thank you to Nicole and Jill and Rachel and Heidi for having me here today, and thank you guys for being here too. So I'm going to talk about community, and I want to just sort of preface this by saying that I'm going to talk about the way that I do this. And I think that one slide you'll see up here is the idea that mindset is more important than the specific tactics. So I'm sharing some of the tactics I use and what's worked for me, but what I hope you take away from this is something that's more about the mindset than about the specifics. So back in 2015, I started throwing these like lady parties, and that's just the unofficial name I call them. Basically, I invite all the women that I know in Chicago to my house to do something, and if you consider yourself a woman, you can come to this party, you can bring other women, and it's a party. And I started doing this for a couple of reasons. The first is that I think that women behave differently when there are not men around. And the women in the room probably know that that's true. You dress differently, you laugh differently, you eat and drink differently, maybe you talk about different stuff. I had a woman who came to the very first party I threw, which was this like open dress code, come in your workout gear, come in your business suit, wear what you want. And she showed up in this like tiny dress, this like lingerie, lacy number. She walked in the door and people raised it was like 5 p.m. And people were like, and she was like, I can't wear this around men, so I'm wearing it here. I love this dress. And I was like, okay, cool, you do you, that's great. But the second reason, and this is related to my work at Girls Who Code, is that people ask, why do you need a women-only space? And the reason is when you look around, particularly in the tech industry, often the rest of the world, like the negative space, is male-only or male-dominated space. There's existed old boys networks and these sort of clubs, sometimes literally clubs and sometimes just unofficial networks forever. And I think that when you get a bunch of ambitious and talented women in a room, they start to make those connections of their own accord. And this is just a few photos from my parties. This is what happens. We sit on the floor and drink out of solo cups and sometimes make vagina-themed cookies on Valentine's Day. And it's just really casual. People meet new people. They bring friends. I make new friends. That's how I met Heidi. But then something changed. Raise your hand if you remember where you were on election night. Raise your hand if you will always remember where you were on election night. Yeah, that's how it feels for me. And I think like a lot of people, I was really shocked, and I started asking myself a lot of questions about whether I was doing enough, and was I putting my resources and my money and my time and my energy in the right places. And I found myself coming up short when I really thought about what I had put into that election, and so I wanted to change things. So what I did is decide to put some purpose and intention behind these parties. So this is the first one that came after the election. Had a big lady party, and we collected money for a group called the National Network of Abortion Funds. And in this particular moment with the Supreme Court as it is, abortion funds are what help women pay for the travel and extenuating circumstances it takes sometimes to go hundreds of miles or exorbitant costs to get reproductive rights and justice. So we raised money, we collected clothes for a women's organization, and we still had a really good time. So that was the first one. Then I encountered this organization named Jane. Has anybody heard of Jane? It's a Chicago-based, yeah, I see a few small hands. Okay, so Jane, there's this documentary. This picture on the left is about Jane. It's Jane, an abortion collective. And this is a group of college-age women in the late 60s in Chicago, so 18, 19, 20-year-old women who created literally an underground network to get women to abortions when it was still illegal. So this was in Chicago. They literally had a phone number that you handed from one woman to the next, and you called it and you said, I need to talk to Jane. And like a woman, a 19-year-old college student would pick up the phone and they would help you find a doctor. And they would house you in Chicago, and women would come from all over the Midwest. In the 5 years that Jane was up and running, and they only ended because Roe v. Wade passed in '73, they did 12,000 abortions. So this is not a small organization. And it was totally underground, and it was just for women connecting each other to other people when they needed services. I find this group so inspiring. And so what I decided to do Yeah, there we go, was hold a screening of this documentary. So I rented a space in Chicago, created an Eventbrite, and then I fundraised, and we donated to what I consider to be the modern incarnation of Jane, which is a group called Midwest Access Coalition. The woman on the left in the screen is Leah Greenblum. She's the founder. So even though we have legal abortion now, we still have some of the same challenges. So if you live in Texas, you might be 500 miles from the closest clinic. Or you might live in a state that has more restrictive laws than Illinois. And so we in Chicago currently today have 3,000 women that come every year that travel great distances to Chicago. And Midwest Access houses them, gives them transport and support, and sometimes financial assistance too. So I think this is sort of the modern incarnation of Jane. I volunteer with this group. It's amazing. I've hosted women in my house. So we hosted the screening, and we had about 150 people show up. And then I decided to take it in a different direction. I had a musician friend, a folk singer, Taylor Rogers, who's really talented, and we just did a house concert. That's my living room in the bottom right. It can seat about 25 people if you move all the other furniture out. So we invited people over, we did some fundraising, performed some art. There was a poet who read at the beginning. And then the last one I want to share with you, just as an example, is more recent. I didn't ask for money in this one because there's a point where you can't fundraise from the same people over and over again, right? You reach a limit. So you start to think about either reaching new people or doing something else. And so in this instance, I thought about raising awareness and having a conversation. So it was at the moment that the Me Too movement was breaking. HBO did this amazing movie about the confirmation of Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Kerry Washington plays Anita Hill. If you haven't watched it, it's amazing. Greg Kinnear is Joe Biden. He does not come off well, just so you know. And it's really fantastic. And so I invited a bunch of women over to my house. We had a movie night. This is what Heidi, where's Heidi in the room? She came to this event, and we sat and watched. And what happened afterwards is another imitation of something that happened a lot in the 60s, consciousness-raising groups, right, where women would get together and share what was going on in their lives, particularly things that were happening in their homes that felt maybe too personal to share, but felt part of a political movement. And that phrase, the personal is political, comes from those consciousness-raising groups in the 60s. But it was the idea that you can validate your experiences by sharing them with other people. It makes you feel less alone. It makes you feel like you have more power. And after the movie, we sat around, and this just spiraled, and people were sharing talks. Heidi's nodding. She remembers. It was really meaningful and really powerful and pretty unscripted. So when I think about these events, which I now do quarterly, the goal is a couple of things. It might be to raise money. It's something I try to do a lot. I work in the tech industry. I know a lot of people with some disposable income. If there's a reason to get them together, people feel more motivated to donate. But it's also about awareness and exposing people to organizations and movements and pieces of art that maybe they haven't encountered before. Most people don't know about Jane. It's a phenomenal story, and most people are not familiar. Midwest Access Coalition is another group like that. And then I also want to connect people to each other and to organizations. So when you meet people, how many people in the room are here because someone invited them? Yeah, that's really awesome, right? The idea that when you know someone who knows something cool, you therefore get to be invited to these things. And lastly, just a safe place, and this has come up a couple times with the Black Women in Tech organization we heard from earlier, giving people a space where they feel like they can share the stories that are on their minds and their thoughts and opinions. So that's sort of how I think about these goals. But back to what I started with, it's a mindset, not the tactics. My tactics are holding events, because I really love throwing parties. I love movies and art and music, and so I like to tie those things in. I like to fundraise, and clearly you now know my politics. I like to work on reproductive rights organizations. But those are my tactics. You might have your own. You might do a newsletter or be really active on social media or prefer to sit one-on-one with people in coffees. But what sort of has to stay the same are the tactics. Yeah, there we go. So what has to stay the same is the mindset. Your tactics may change. So I'm trying to get you to think about, instead of asking, what can my community give me, what can I offer back to my community? So the big question here, right, is what can you do for other people? It's sort of like a very open-ended question, but in particular, every time you have an opportunity that knocks on your door, let's say it's an offer to interview for a job, or you get invited to speak at a conference, or someone offers you a freelance writing piece, whatever it may be, and you think, I don't have the bandwidth to do that, I'm not free on that date, I'm not interested in that job. Rather than letting that be the end of the conversation, what if your next thing was to pass it on to somebody else? So there's some examples here, but the idea in general is to be an opportunity maker for other people. So if you're not interested in that job, who might be? If you can't attend the event, who would want to go? If you can't sit on that panel, I just passed one to Rachel 2 weeks ago that I couldn't sit on the panel and handed it over. Can you nominate someone else? And just in general, and it's worth mentioning, particularly in this room, one thing to think about is who are you passing these opportunities to? What can you do to broaden the pool of people that you're reaching? If I hand everything I get to another 30-year-old white woman who's in the tech industry, like that doesn't really do much to change the demographics or who's in front. So how can you reach out to people who are new to an industry or are changing careers or are from underrepresented groups in your field and just be really proactive about trying to hand those opportunities off? So I want to do a little activity real quick. We're going to do 1 minute. This is what we do with girls who code a lot. It's called a turn and talk. You're going to spend like 10 seconds brainstorming something that has come across your feed, an opportunity, an event, a job offer, a discount code, a really great article. And I want you to think of something you could hand to somebody else, something you're not going to take advantage of, but you could pass off, and tell your neighbor about it. Tell them what the thing is, who you're going to hand it to, and why it would be a good opportunity to pass off. Ready, set, go. 1 minute. Talk. Yes. You want to leave here with something concrete. Got about 20 more seconds. Counting down from 10. Start to wrap it up, 9. Can I have your attention in 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Hi. Okay, so the last piece of this puzzle is I saw someone exchange business cards right now, and that's my favorite thing. So the last piece of this puzzle is to make it happen. I don't know what system you use, a to-do list, a calendar, a reminder in your phone, but make sure this goes on a list. Like, I'm going to walk out of here today and email this person and send them this thing. So, the second piece of this, and this is a shorter bit, but it's something that's specific to the way that I like to do this stuff, is think about how do I make this more effective? So what I was thinking about with these parties is making them regular. That's why they're quarterly. It puts it in my brain that this is something I want to do. People are expecting it. They know what it means when the invitation comes. I like to be really open. The more the merrier. If you've got friends that you think would like this, Bailey came to a party, Kaylee came to a party. People that are in this room have been invited by someone else to a party in my house. And the more the merrier. That's sort of how this stuff grows. And then I really like to formalize the sharing of opportunities. So one problem I have is I can only post so many things on Facebook every day, right? Like if I just keep posting them, they're seen by the same people. We all know the Facebook algorithm is not showing my stuff to everybody. So how can I make it a little bit more regular? I started a newsletter. So this is the newsletter. It's on the right. It's called Jane Squad. It is named after the women of Jane. But it also stands for Jobs, Activism, Networking, and Events. And it goes out every Thursday. It went out this morning. I did it from my Airbnb. And it's a list of jobs and events that are coming up. And the general gist is it's things that have social justice or social impact components. It's not super cut and dry. It's really what I think is interesting. It's my newsletter. I get to make it whatever I want. So I put the jobs that people have emailed me. I put the things I've seen on Facebook, the events I've been invited to, whether I'm going or not. And it goes in one big newsletter, super clean. I use TinyLetter. It goes out on Thursdays. It gives me one place. Instead of posting 14 times a week on Facebook, everything goes in here. I will say it's super Chicago focused because that's where I live and that's what I know. But if you're interested, you are welcome to sign up. The URL is at the bottom. I mean, really, I would just encourage you to create your own, honestly. So the last thing I just want to share here is how do you know if something's working? This is the feedback that I get from these events. It's the kinds of emails I get after people meet each other. The one at the bottom really speaks to me. This is a woman named Ellen who moved to LA. And at one of my early parties, Rachel was there. We were wearing sticky note name tags. It was like the beginning. She met my friend Jenny, and that made her time in Chicago richer. And the thing that makes me the most happy at these events is when I look around and some group of women is leaving early, and I'm like, oh, where are you guys going? They're like, oh, we met each other last time, and we're going to a concert, so we got to go by. And they've become friends, and they're taking these relationships outside of my house and offline, and that's sort of the point, is especially with people who are new to a field or new to a city, how do you get them tapped in? So on this last note, we have our very own Heidi. She came to my party, and Heidi, I'm going to share the email that you wrote me after because it was really special. And she said, I've been meaning to reach out to you. Thank you again for organizing such a great time. I had a couple of meta moments, this is after the movie, during the night in which I was overcome with gratitude for having been connected to such amazing, badass women. And I got this note from Heidi, and it meant so much to me. And Heidi, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, you know that she's got a new job, Hyde Park Angels. Where did you find your job? Through Jane Squad. Yeah, that's right. And I want to thank and end on this note because Heidi is one of these people. She is a connector. That's why you're all here in this room. And the whole intermittent team, and she's why I'm here. So you've already done that first step. You're here today. So every person that you meet, see if there's something that you can pass along, something you get from them that maybe isn't a good fit for you. But letting the conversation die there is when we get in trouble. Instead, hand it off to somebody else. So thank you so much for listening. I'm having a really great time.